This video will go over how to complete the square to solve quadratic equations. So if we look at number 8 in your notes, okay, it says solve by completing the square. So that's what I'm going to discuss up here. But if you had this problem and it just said to solve this problem, we already know from chapter 6 when we learned how to factor that to solve this problem, since it's a trinomial, we can use the AC method. What number multiplies to -5 and it has to add to -4. So we only have 1 times 5 and it has to add a -4, so that means the bigger number is the negative, and that would work. So then we'd have x plus 1 and x minus 5. And then we would set each factor equal to 0, and that is how we would get our two solutions, x equals -1 and x equals 5. Because to get the x by itself, right? Okay, so we know the answer. So when I go through these steps, you're going to say, why would we do this when we could just factor really quick? True. I would not use these steps to do this problem here. However, I like to start with a simpler problem that you know the answer to. You all can follow that these two answers work by using a method we are already knowledgeable about, so that you can see that we're going to get these two answers using these new steps to us. So why would you use these steps? You would use these for problems that can't be factored. So since this one can be factored, that's the method I would pick. So the purpose of what we're learning is for when it can't be factored. But I'm going to show you with problems that can at first. So the first step, step number 1, is divide each side of the equation by the leading coefficient a. So there should be no number in front of the x squared. We want it to be a 1. So if we take a look at number 8, we can skip step 1 because the a value in the front here is already what we want. Okay. Step 2, we want to isolate the constant. So we want to isolate the constant. So what that means is I'm going to go ahead and add 5. I want the constant all by itself. So I want the terms that have the x's together. So that would be step 2. Get the constant alone. Then step 3, you're going to divide the coefficient of the x term. So we call this b right here. So this is a and b. So we take the b value here and divide it by 2. So I would recommend on the side, step 3, I would recommend you writing it out. Yes, I know you could probably take -4 and divide it by 2 in your head. Trust me, you want to write it down for the ones that get harder. Okay, so that was step 3. Take this number here and divide it by 2. Okay, so then step 4, you're going to square that number that we just got. So step 4, and again, I know some of you can do this in your head, but trust me, write it down. It will make this so much easier. Square this number, and that was step 4. So again, the steps are very simple. I mean, divide by 2, square. It's remembering it, and to remember these steps, it takes practice. All right, so number 5, you're going to take this number here, and you're going to add it to both sides of the equation, because whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides of the equation. So then over here we get 9. And now the whole point in doing that is because now you should have something here that can be factored. Now keep in mind it already could have been factored. The point is, if you start with a problem that can't be factored, by following these steps, it inserts a number that now allows this to be factorable. Again, I know it was already factorable, but pretend it wasn't. Now I should be able to, by doing step 5, so this was step 5 right here, we added that number here to both sides. By doing that now, step 6, we should be able to factor the trinomial, and you'll know if you did it right if it factors into a square. So that means, for example, here's an example of a square. When we factor this, what multiplies to 9 and adds to 6? It should be the same number times the same number. That is why we are doing these steps. When I factor this right now, so step 6, when I factor and I ask myself what multiplies to 4 and adds to -4, it should be the same number. -2 times -2 multiplies to 4 and adds to -4. And if you do your work very organized, it will always be this number right here for step 6. So when you factor this, you're always going to use that number there. So x minus 2 times x minus 2. And the whole point is that this can be written as x minus 2 to the second power. Now, if you watched the video in this lesson for 9.1 for numbers 1 through 7, now you'll use that video. So now you're going to use part 1 video and follow those steps. So when you have something to the second power, we can square root both sides because the index here is 2. And 2 goes into 2 once. So these will go away. You just have one x minus 2 left. And whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. And just like you learned in the previous video for this section, you have to put a plus or minus. Why? Let me give you an easier example. When you square root both sides, the reason why you need to put a plus or minus is because if we take a look at this easier example to understand, what number squared is 4? 2. 2 squared is 4. And -2 squared is 4. That's what that means. That means 2 is a solution and -2 is a solution. So this is why we need to put the plus or minus there. So then we're going to put plus or minus, and then if we can simplify this, we're going to simplify it. So what times itself is 9? The answer is 3. So now we are going to continue to solve. We're going to go ahead and add 2 to both sides. And then we're left with, so what this is saying 3, positive 3 plus 2 is an answer, and -3 plus 2 is an answer. So we would get 5, and we would get -1 for x. So then if we want to feel good about our answers, we can take our calculator and plug them in. So I'm going to demonstrate with one of them for time's sake here. So I'm going to check and show you that 5 is actually I'm going to go ahead with -1. I'm going to do -1. So I'm going to show you that -1 does make this equation work and make both sides equal. So because the answer is negative, I need to put parentheses and then square and then minus 4 times the answer was -1 and then minus 5. And if my answer is correct, it will say 0. And then I would do that for 5, and then I would show that that is the correct answer. Both of them work.